to place today. You know, today is Israel's Memorial Day. You know that we were supposed to begin Israel's Independence Day in few hours, but because there are very severe wildfires in the mountains of Jerusalem, and because there's a very severe wind, those rituals were canceled. This is extreme. This is, and you do know also that last Wednesday was Yom HaShoah, which is Holocaust Remembrance Day. And of course, in a week, we will have the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. So, and today is the 572nd day since October 11, and we still have 59 hostages in Gaza. It's been, for everyone who cares, it's been the roughest 572 days, perhaps in Jewish history, certainly since the Shoah. So what we are going to talk about, I'm going to try to give you know, the good formal presentation of our international study on children of survivors of the Holocaust. But I also would, but of course, the second part, we will move to the present within the context that I just delineated, and it's not all of it, of course. There is the rise of the right and all over the world. We have a president in this country that is trying to append the United States and the whole world. And we have a leadership in Israel that is right-wing to extremist. So we are in a totally appended universe where we will. So let me start with the formal presentation, and then we discuss everything else. So and I'm here in New York speaking to you in Germany. So this is sort of the setup could not have been planned better, in a sense, if we were to write a drama, a historical drama. So let me start with a very formal presentation. We will then go back to reflecting together how these findings apply to today and whatever else we want to reflect on this pivotal historical day. So while widely investigated, research on massive trauma's impact on Holocaust survivors' offspring has yielded mixed findings. Time does not allow a review of the many relevant studies, but most can be found at the digital library of the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma. And I'm happy to help. As Julia and Elizabeth know, I am eminently available and feel free to contact me. Transmission mechanisms in the literature during the last 50 years or so ranged from biological to psychological to familial to sociocultural to political, etc. Description and explanation are bounded by the dimensions chosen in theoretical orientation of the scholar. Transmission modes are not mutually exclusive. Rather, for most individuals, they reflect some overlap in a cumulative effect. In my own attempt to make sense of the seeming contradictions, my framework, which at the time I called Trauma and the Continuity of Self, a multidimensional, multidisciplinary, integrative framework, comprehensively describes the complex nature of surviving massive trauma and the diverse ways of adapting to life's challenges in its aftermath. And as shown in Figure 1, that now you have in front of you, my framework's overarching features are its focus on self-identity, multidimensionality, the ubiquitous conspiracy of silence in the aftermath of trauma, and continuity, rupture, repair. An individual's identity involves a complex interplay of multiple spheres or systems, including but not limited to the biological, intrapsychic, familial, communal, economic, cultural, national, and international. Please turn to Figure 2. So if you sort of envision an elevator shaft moving, these systems dynamically coexist along the time dimension, enabling a continuous conceptualization of life from past through present to future. Exposure to trauma, as you see in this drawing, that was done by a very old friend who is no longer with us, Fred Turner, a Holocaust survivor artist, one of the Theresienstadt artists. So exposure to trauma causes a rupture, a state of being stuck in this free flow. The degree of rupture, fragmentation, and disorientation is partly determined by the time, duration, extent, and meaning of the trauma for the individual. But it is also determined by the survival mechanism and strategies used to adapt to it. The degree of rupture is further exacerbated by the trauma after the trauma. That was coined by Rappaport, another Holocaust survivor. The trauma after the trauma, by how others respond, for example, societal indifference to, avoidance, and denial of the survivor's experience and the survivor's reactions. Elsewhere, I've studied this ubiquitous post-trauma conspiracy of silence in depth. Keilson, a Dutch psychiatrist, named these phenomena the third traumatic sequence when he spoke about child survivors of the Holocaust. Simmons, a criminologist, called it the second wound in the context of crime. Others, homecoming stress in Vietnam veterans to explain their detrimental consequences for Vietnam veterans and their offspring. The result may render the victim survivor, please turn to figures 3, particularly to further trauma ruptures throughout the life cycle. See here the trauma rupture and in those days, I called it fixity to differentiate from Freud's fixation. But so you can see the trauma rupture and fixity, survivor strategies. Remember this. We will come back to it later. And hold this in your mind. It may also render immediate reaction to trauma chronic. In the extreme, survival strategies generalize to a way of life and become enduring post-trauma adaptational styles. These styles encompass those intrafamilial and interpersonal psychological and behavioral coping, mastery, and defense mechanisms the victim-survivor adapted as survival strategies during and after the trauma. They become an integral part of the survivor's personality, repertoire of defense, or character armor, view of him or herself, of others and the world. That is, they become the survivor's way of being in the world. These adaptational styles also shape the survivor's parenting and family life, and in turn, their children's upbringing, emotional development, identity, and beliefs about themselves, their peers, their societies, and the world, thereby becoming intergenerational. The parents' adaptational styles, thus, are the child's biopsychosocial milieu that ultimately influences the severity of the child's, what I call, reparative adaptational impact. I hope you see it clearly enough. It will become clearer. Our work then was to see if data would support this theory of multi-generational impacts. To us, the important question was not if children of survivors have mental health problems. Surely some do, some don't. But rather, who among them have mental health problems? To gather the data, it was first necessary to create measures of these various constructs that were tailored specifically to offspring. To validate these measures, my colleagues and I conducted a study of approximately 500 children of survivors who completed the web-based inventory, both in North America and in Israel, both in English and in Hebrew at the same time. The inventory had 3 parts. Part 1 measured post-trauma adaptational style of the parents as perceived by their children for each parent, because we wanted to see mother and father influencing. As shown in figure 4, please. Go ahead, change it to 4. Exploratory factor analysis of the parents' adaptational styles, or PAS, yielded 3 higher order factors reflecting intensities of victim style, numb style, and fighter style. The data revealed clear distinctions among these 3 styles. Victim style was characterized by being stuck in the trauma rupture, emotional volatility, and overprotectiveness. Numb style by emotional detachment, conspiracy of silence within the family, and intolerance of weakness. And fighter style by valuing and maintaining Jewish identity and valuing mastery and justice. These scales were highly reliable, as shown by measures of internal consistency and cross-language congruence. The survey was taken, as I said before, both in English and in Hebrew. 2, you can move now to figure 5. Part 2, reparative adaptational impacts, or RAI for short, measured Holocaust survivors' children's perceptions of themselves. This construct expresses the core, perhaps unconscious motivation of the second generation to undo and repair the past and heal their parents and themselves. I chose the word impact to connote plurally, to connote both their plurality and their multi-generational dynamics, because it's both from their parents to children and from them to their own children. As you can see in figure 5, the RAI reflect the offspring self-reported insecurity about their competence, reparative protectiveness, need for control, obsession with the Holocaust, defensive psychosocial constriction, and immature dependency. In a subsample of participants who were also interviewed using the SCID, or the Structural Clinical Interview for DSM Disorders, the RAI was highly related to the likelihood of meeting criteria for psychological disorder. When reparative adaptational impacts were high, almost half of the participants met criteria for one or more disorders. This compares with only 8% meeting criteria when reparative adaptational impacts were low. Of the SCID-defined disorders studied, this is important for you to remember. Generalized anxiety disorder was the most frequent, followed by major depressive episode, and last was PTSD. Okay, the reason I'm underscoring this was because a lot of the studies compare PTSD in the parents with PTSD in the children, and don't really understand that actually PTSD in the children is the lowest indicator. And it's latent. We talk about it later. It becomes PTSD when the children themselves are confronted or experience trauma. So only 2 variables independently predicted these disorders. The offspring age, the younger offspring were at higher risk, and RAI, the reparative adaptational impact. Parent style were also correlated with the presence of disorder. The severity of the offspring RAI was strongly related to the parent-victim style, and to a lesser extent to the parent's numb style. The mother's effect on the children was stronger, but both mother and father's style contributed. The most detrimental situation for the child was when both mother and father had intense victim style. This effect is central to our hypothesized model shown in figure 6. So you can move to figure 6. Thank you. Part 3 of the inventory gathered information on 4-generation family history and demographics. These questions were important in allowing us to test the model in which family history and family milieu predict post-trauma adaptational style that in turn predicts children reparative adaptational impacts. Preliminary analyses of part 3 helped us to identify the most influential components for further analysis. You can see them in figure 7. So the two most influential components of family history were the mother's age cohort, that is, whether the mother was child, adolescent, or adult, and the nature of parents' Holocaust experiences. Family milieu included the post-Holocaust social environment, sociocultural setting, that is, living in Israel or in North America, and socioeconomic status. Number 2, family configuration, especially whether one or both parents were survivors, the so-called, what Kellerman called the double dose effect. Number 3 is social support, belongingness. For example, surviving parents, grandparents, or both in family size, and affiliation with survivors in Jewish groups. And 4, continuity. The generational linkages that help survivors and their children maintain identities despite ruptures across multiple spheres and systems. We hypothesized that the effect of family history and family milieu on the offspring would be indirect. This means that they operate through intensity of the parent's victim style. And that in turn is what primarily affects offspring Y. In other words, the effect goes through the parents to the child. The data largely supported this model. One of the most influential indirect effects was sociocultural settings. Participants who grew up in Israel fared better than those raised in North America. Their parents had less intense victim style, and the offspring had lower RAI. This result suggests that the Israeli setting buffered or counteracted some of the adverse effects of the rupture. 3 of the 4 measures of identity, including broken generational linkages, had stronger effect in North America than Israel. The majority of Holocaust survivors settled in Israel and North America, while both sociocultural settings offered a new life. Israel symbolized millennial continuity and Jewish identity renewal. However, all effects of the settings were indirect. They only affected the children because they affected the parents. Only one background variable had both direct and indirect effect of the child on the child, that is, broken generational linkages. This means that they were detrimental to offspring in a way that was over and above their effect on the parents. which made it overall the most influential background variable we studied. Now, please look at the slice of the model, the eighth. So here you go, the mother's victim style, father victim styles. You have extra familial experience of Holocaust rupture, right? Leading to broken generational linkages. You have intrafamilial transmission of Holocaust rupture. And then you have the intrapsychic representation of Holocaust rupture. So let me conclude that we demonstrated empirically that survivors' experiences during and life circumstances after the Holocaust do indeed affect the children, a crucial question that has plagued the field for 5 decades, and do so primarily through parents' post-trauma adaptational style. When combined with the analysis of stable epigenetic markers, such as DNA methylation, the Danieli inventory presents a considerable improvement over extant practice of using available personality checklists intended for the global population. Of the family history measures, internment was most strongly related to the intensities of the survivor parent's victim style, and as a result, had the strongest indirect effect on the offspring. Yet, the effect of post-Holocaust family milieu were stronger than those of family history. Taken as a whole, these findings suggest a multiplicity of influences on and off survivor parents. To understand children of survivors, we need to know far more about their family life than their parents' survivor status, age cohort, and Holocaust experience. In line with my theory, our study strongly supports a multidimensional approach to assess an individual's post-traumatic status. 2 of the various family milieu relationships stood out. The first was that living in Israel appeared to be reparative. While both Israel and North America offered a new future for survivors, particularly as compared with staying in Germany, and we will talk about that in our discussion. And despite Holocaust-related and other ongoing hardships in Israel, Israel was uniquely endowed to mitigate many of the long-term effects of Holocaust trauma. As Solomon observed, in Israel, the Holocaust was the legacy of all. And Israeli survivors found meaning in recreating and maintaining the ancient new Jewish state and actively defending her survival. The second key finding was the apparent protective effects of continuity, a conception of life that spans past, present, and future. In our study, both measures of continuity, that is, broken generational linkages and continuity in religious affiliation or practice across generation, had indirect effect. The greater the continuity, the lower the parents' intensities of victim style, and in turn, the lower the child's reparative adaptational impacts. Broken generational linkages had, in addition, a direct effect, yielding the largest total effect of any independent variable. Moreover, certain circumstances signifying social support, belongingness, notably survival presence of the mother's mother, and larger survivor family likely enhanced family continuity. Indeed, a greater sense of continuity with Jewish history might be another protective factor afforded by living in Israel. Perhaps more than any other concept we studied, broken generational linkages captures the rupture and tragedy inherent to the Holocaust. For Holocaust survivors, Nazis' destruction of families and communities was the critical extra-familial experience underlying the development of victim adaptational style that through subsequent intrafamilial dynamic adversely affected the children. Further, broken generational linkages became the offspring intrapsychic representation of the rupture, affecting them not only indirectly via intrafamilial transmission processes, but also directly as the internalized Holocaust rupture. Under normal circumstances, I would now proceed to summarize the findings, discuss their clinical and research implication, and make quite a few multidimensional recommendations for the future. For example, I would say that, quotes, focusing solely on clinical diagnosis as the outcome and interest lessens our chances of comprehending the entirety and lifelong meaning of trauma survivors' offspring problem, concerns, and worldviews. But then came another convulsion of evil, October 7th. And it happened in totally defenseless, yes, defenseless Israel. And last year, in his poem, It Used to Be on Yom HaShoah, Israeli poet Yoav Ginai wrote, "It used to be, remember? On Yom HaShoah, we wore a white shirt for the ceremony, and we recited in a whisper, as if it were a will, 'The blessed is the match,' year after year. And how we watched the oceans of horror in films of Holocaust and bewildered heroism, trying to digest the hatred and the evil that seemed so far away in time. Once upon a time on Yom HaShoah, we could not digest the intensity of the terrible pain, and there was not a fraction of comparison to the routine days of our lives. Once we knew that the Holocaust could not happen again, ever. Her face would never arise again, because now it is different. There is now a state which will protect her daughters and her babies. And today, the eve of Yom HaShoah, he wrote it a year ago, is different from all others. And it smites within our veins, because this time we were stabbed without warning in the shards of Holocaust and heroism in our soul. And you can put the slide away, and we can open the discussion about how indeed our findings apply maybe to today. And some thoughts about the presence of Jews and Jewish people in the world today. Actually, a year ago, we did have a webinar, and it's on our website, so please listen to it. We have over close to 70 webinars, not only about the Holocaust. That's a different story. But we have one that we did for Yom HaShoah, which exactly we called Mourning and Grieving the Shoah after October 7. And there, Amit Shria, Julian, you met him. Amit Shria reported preliminary findings that show indeed, but his research is basically PTSD, depression. So you know what I think about that already. So, but just the same, if you look at PTSD, they measure two things: PTSD, depression. They also measured whether people experienced a linkage between Shoah and October 7, okay? And that was children of Holocaust survivors. So they found that indeed children of survivors experienced more anxiety than the comparison group, okay? And they also found more depression. Now, in Israel, I think they measured anxiety. In the United States, they measured depression. Both were higher in children of survivors compared to comparisons. And regarding the linkages, they did something very interesting. They looked at different layers of linkage. I mean, more the cognitive similarity. Is it similar? Because, of course, all of us kept discussing, is it like a pogrom? Is it like a Shoah? It's not like a Shoah. Holocaust survivors said, yes, it was like a Shoah, especially with hostages. And this discussion will continue forever. This is not the right time for us to even, we can say the questions, but I don't think we have the answers. But they found what's interesting in their findings is that children of survivors in their samples seem to respond more physically and sensorially, that is, more automatically, more immediately. Which makes sense to you, right? It's almost like you don't need to say it. It's like your body knows. It's exactly what we have conceptually, what in my theory is the internalized rupture. Okay, the moment you live with an internalized rupture, and that's in general, we know that new traumas re-rupture that rupture, right? Both for the survivors and for children of survivors. It rips open whatever defensive, whatever scar tissue we created. And it falls into that same hole of forever grief and forever forever dread and forever rage. If you look at my own finding, yes, indeed, we see to this day, even when you watch the Israeli news, which I'm addicted to, you see people respond in a victim style, people respond in a fighter style, people respond in a non-style, which means these are the people who don't talk. For me, it always shocking to find people who still don't talk, particularly in a country like Israel, where social connection and a sense of family is with the whole country and community. It's not just with your own little family, right? And talking and sharing and getting together and singing together and expressing together and speaking in general, right? Expressing oneself are more common than in other cultures. And create a sense of togetherness and safety. But of course, we also, this is like a perfect storm, right? Because we also have a government, and I don't intend to start a political discussion, but we also have a government that strives on dividing people rather than uniting people. Even when they say the word uniting people, they do the opposite. We have the majority of the state of Israel totally committed to Israel's survival and helping its survival and sacrificing the sons and daughters to defend the country, while the Orthodox religious faction refuses to participate. They believe that praying is the fight. And it creates a great deal of resentment and a great deal of sense of abandonment. So if you take, you remember in my findings, we found that the Israeli children of survivors really did much better than North Americans, even though North Americans were wealthier, better positioned socially, politically, in every way you think of success, right? Still, there was a much better sense of connection, of meaning, of reason to live, of reason, right, to re-raise the Jewish people, to renew the Jewish continuity with the land. We now really have a division in Israel, and the political and religious is very related. So actually, those of you who are familiar with it, you know what I'm talking about, and you know how complex it is if we were to speak about each one of these dimensions historically. Okay, but at the same time, so again, to give the historical context, even before October 7 and probably used by Hamas, the divisions began, right? And there were more demonstrations in Israel than ever before. And when people felt abandoned by the government, I mean, it's totally shocking. And I don't know how you feel. I'm still in shock. The degree of abandonment on October 7 is shocking. It's totally, it's difficult to imagine it, even though it happened. And the more we learn, the more shocking it is, rather than the less shocking it is. So there was political abandonment, there was security abandonment, and then so much of what, and particularly, you remember October 7 attacks, the most brutal attacks were in the South, right? Where survivors lived in the kibbutz, Holocaust survivors, and raised their children, grandchildren, and believed in peace. These were the people who truly believed in peace with the Palestinians, maintained connection and relationship. So they felt abandoned on so many levels, and they still do. And of course, the abandonment is a major issue. That comes also in what the word I didn't mention yet, anti-Semitism. So what we saw was, and between us, I think that it must have been planned, because the rise of, it wasn't a rise in anti-Semitism, it was a spike in anti-Semitism. So it was not only a rupture for the survivor, it was almost like it was waiting to erupt. And I'm one of those who for years have said that Europe is still living in the 30s in terms of anti-Semitism. Okay, but I said that people sort of, some agreed, some disagreed. But the spike is still shocking too. How come it jumped all the way up and so quickly? And not only by Muslim people who might identify with the Brethrens, the Palestinians. And this was this was like within 2 or 3 days of October 7th. That's why part of me believes that this was planned too, as part of the October 7, and part of the October 7 attack. But mind you, I'm now talking about the perpetrators, not about the victim, right? Because the moment we talk about anti-Semitism, we're now talking about the other side, and let's remember that, okay? So it wasn't just Muslims. It was in the United States, it was democratic Jews. It still is. Because I like to know everything, including how my enemies think. I belong to all of these lists of people who believe that they're in the right, right? So October 7 happened. It shocked the conscience of humanity. It's certainly still shocking, but it was the conspiracy of silence about the victimization aspect immediately happened, starting from the Secretary General of the UN, who said this was understandable, onward, plus anti-Semitism. There was, and I'm an advisor to the Secretary General Special Representative on sexual violence in conflict. And she was not allowed to say that there was sexual violence in October 7. So the conspiracy of silence and the denial to this day is so thick. At the same time, you have anti-Semitism in the strangest ways possible, in the strangest corners possible. Do you know, for example, yesterday President Trump fired the husband of the prior Vice President of the United States, Doug Emhoff. He fired him from the United States Holocaust Museum. He fired all of the board members who he wanted to retaliate against. So anti-Semitism or pro-Semitism also works in mysterious ways. And the Jews in this country are very torn between thinking how wonderful Trump is for us and against anti-Semitism at the same time as they feel that he, and it's not just him, it's the government, uses the fight against anti-Semitism in order to victimize other people. It's sort of crazy what's going on. But yes, it's the first time in my life that I wonder whether to wear the hostage sign or the Star of David at the UN, for example. A month ago, I directed a panel at the UN. I'm connected with the UN. I'm an expert. I created all of victims' rights instruments in international law. So I have quite a presence there. And I was told by a British member of the panel that he will not participate in the panel if I mention the Holocaust or if I mention Israel. And this goes on every day and everywhere. To the point I shared with Elizabeth when we first spoke. It's the first time in my life I asked myself, who would hide me? Would there be anyone to hide me? Our center has a Haiti working group, a Yazidi working group, a nuclear working group, a Rwanda working group. We truly are the home of victim groups around the world. Very much out of my vision of Mitzion Tetzeh Torah. You know what that means. From Israel, the Torah will come. And whatever we learn, we should give the word, right? Because to help the world. In one of the groups that I conduct, in the chat was an purely anti-Semitic remark. Of course, somebody must have immediately told them to take it off. It's still with me. On and on. I'm most anxious, actually, because I do want this to be a discussion. I'm most anxious to hear your experiences in Germany. But and there's the question, of course. I told you I created all victims' rights instruments, including the International Criminal Court. And both the International Court of Justice and the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court declared that Israel is committing a genocide. I How ironic, isn't it? We are thankful that my parents and his father are no longer alive because it would kill them. That's one piece. You know the name Eli Sharabi? Yeah, he's one of the hostages who came out who looked like a Holocaust corpse walking. And he said this, they had this totally crazy visit in Auschwitz of Holocaust survivors and hostages to the one and only surviving gas chamber. I didn't even know that a gas chamber survived. Did you? German mistake. So this year it's so insane. So they were led to that gas chamber. I guess presumably people thought that it has some similarity to the tunnels in Gaza. So Eli said there, the Shoah of the Jewish people, which took place here in Europe during the 40s in the 20th century, was unlike the genocide of any other nation in the world's history. All the representatives present here today, the bereaved families and the representatives of families of hostages of October 7, are living proof of the triumph of the Jewish spirit. Whoops. The Jewish people will live together. We hope and pray to soon see the return of the 59 hostages still held in Gaza, alive and well, back within the borders of the State of Israel, reunited with their families, and to bring our fallen to a proper burial in Israel. So all of us, out of denial or out of the same faith that kept all of our ancestors continue for the last 2,000, it's for over 2,000 years, 5,000 years. We just continue. We are the only tribe that survived, and survived outside of its own land. So that's also our experience. So when we speak about vulnerability and resilience, etc., we are, in effect, the most resilient people in the world. So that's a fact, too. And of course, there is a question, are we fighting a moral war? And a lot of people in Israel are questioning the wisdom of this continued war. And we keep losing people. On the other hand, people say that there is no war that is more just than this war. And I share some of I share the grief and the striking, horrible pictures of the destruction of Gaza with any human being who has any heart. So let's open the discussion, because I'm sure I would really like to, I would like this to be a discussion more than the rest of the time, to be a discussion rather than me sharing my thoughts. I'm sure you all have a lot of feelings and thoughts from what I described.
Go ahead.
Okay. The effects you have described relate to the Holocaust survivors and their children and grandchildren. To what extent do these re-traumatizations affect Mizrahi in Israel? Do you think that the Mizrahi people in Israel have internalized the trauma of the Holocaust? Or do you think, or is there any different? Are there any difference?
This is a superb question, and it has not been sufficiently researched. Actually, part of the reason I've been pushing my colleagues to do the inventory with the Mizrahi people now for many years. Some of it's not just like my study shows, there is nothing homogeneous about any of the groups we're talking about, right? So when you say Mizrahi, they were different Holocaust experiences, actually. The Jews in Greece were absolutely persecuted, right? Etc. We can literally, geographically move around and see. The other issue, of course, they had their own version of anti-Judaism and anti-Semitism. So it would be very interesting to indeed compare.
Mm.
In fact, there've been one of the reasons I created the inventory, two of the reasons. One was to help the Palestinians actually create a good way to, thank you, Vladimir, stay in touch with me. All of you, please stay in touch. I don't want this to be a finished conversation. We know that getting together is one of the best ways of helping each other in bad times. Good times too, but particularly in bad times, unless we make each other more depressed. But that's a different story. But to go back, one of the reasons I created the inventory was indeed to let the Palestinians scientifically prove their victimization and therefore receive their reparations. You remember reparations was one of the major issues when we still had peace talks. And it looked promising several years ago. So I wanted to help. But because it was standardized on Holocaust survivors' children, and because it was an Israeli psychologist, they refused, even though I even translated it for them. They refused to use it. But, so that was one idea. And my other reason was indeed the Mizrahi Jews. Okay, because there was a time when they said they should also receive reparations for their suffering. And there was an important discussion that went nowhere, like many important discussions. But I still, so thank you for your question. I don't have the answer in a scientific way. What I can tell you is they had their own suffering, and they also suffered when they came to Israel. They were discriminated against. Our history is quite complex and full of pain, really.
Yeah.
Joseph, your hand is up.
Yes, my hand is up. Yeah, I want to come back to the first part of your excellent lecture. These different styles of approaching trauma. You spoke of a victim style, a numb style, and a fighter style. Now, I want to focus on the numb style. This is what interests me, especially the silence, the reasons for the silence of the victims. Now, growing up in a society of perpetrators like Germany, the numbness or the silence of the victims in a way made sense as a way of protecting the family also from the rest of the society. So in these studies which were carried out on offspring of victims and victims themselves, did you see any difference in how this silence affected the offspring between the silence in societies like in the US, which were not perpetrator societies in this respect, and the German society or Austrian society? Was there any difference in how this worked? And I have another question, also related to silence. You noted that the Israeli experience, in a way, healed many of the wounds, or was more supportive for healing certain wounds. But on the other hand, as far as I know, in the first 10 or 20 years of the young state, the victims, the survivors of the Holocaust, were not encouraged to speak about this. So there must have also been a lot of silence in Israeli families in the first 20 or 30 years. So how did this affect, or why didn't it have the same negative effects as in other societies?
Very good. Thank you. You're making me feel young again, because I did my doctorate on the conspiracy of silence, and I've written more than anyone else about it, except actually the Germans came, not Jews in Germany, but children of Nazis wrote about silence. So first of all, I don't have scientific results from Germany, even though, just like with the Arabic, we have the German translation. Please, those of you who are in a university setting, Julia, I asked you that several years ago. Let your students study it. Let your students exactly study this. I created the measure. It took 10 years out of my life. Come on, use it. Okay, there are certain adjustments for children of Nazis, for example, different in children of survivors, but it's durable, and I'm here to help because that's what I love to do. So I don't have a scientific answer, but when you were speaking, I wasn't sure whether you were speaking about the survivors or the Nazis.
Survivors?
survivors. Okay.
There's also a silence of the perpetrators, but I'm not interested in that.
Different silence, yeah.
Mhm.
Please, please, I will help you study this, but let's do it. Oh, who is a professor who has students still among you? Come on. Yeah, Julia, you're still here. Elizabeth, come on, here you go. They could get doctorates on this and teach us the truth. I found 49 ways of not listening in my doctorate. It's really worth reading it. It's probably the best thing I've done. It's a terrible thing to say so many years later. But you know, people who need silence don't want to read this, to read about silence. So, yeah, I would assume that. I agree with you. Clinically, I agree with you. And intuitively, I agree with you that you could survive in post-Nazi Germany better with silence than not. It was probably also dangerous for a good several years. And that leads me also, you can read, go read my dissertation, really, it's good work. I was a good student. So in Israel, I very much go into details about the need of the Israeli society, indeed, to shut the survivors because it was too dangerous. It was experienced as too dangerous to identify, to build a new country with people who went, quote, like sheep to the slaughter. Rather, the Israeli vision at the time was to adapt the, quote, new image of the Jew, right? That of the Warsaw Ghetto upriser. And therefore, by the way, you know, Yad Vashem, the museum of the, it's called Yad Vashem, the Museum of the Shoah and Gvura, right? Shoah and heroism. The country refused for it to be only for the Shoah. Look, it's when I was speaking with Elizabeth about who will there be anybody to hide me, you know, it's the same kind of thoughts today. The same, you know, what Roglic wrote. We all know that we could be back in concentration camps in a week. It's a possibility. Look what Trump is doing in the United States. Look at Orban. Look at a whole lot of extremists, neo-Nazi movements. But at the same time, just like Sharabi, I believe that because we have stayed alive all this time, they won't succeed in finishing us. I really believe that. And we also all know that under certain conditions, denial is a healthy mechanism.
May I say something? I believe, I believe that they will probably not succeed to exterminate the whole Jewish nation, but it is obvious that they can succeed to exterminate me, myself and my family. And it's enough for me. You know, it's enough for me to get PTSD or depression or anything, any psychological disorder. It's unpleasant enough. And the perspectives that the Jewish nation will live further after I'm gone, well, it's nice, but it's not enough for me.
Mhm. But you see, I said that one of the core concepts in my thinking is continuity in rupture repair. And the mere fact of the mere, if you just visualize continuity and yourself as part of a continuity, it is reparative. You know, how do you call Yosef, or Joseph?
Yosef is fine.
Uh,
If I may also add something, in your last part of the lecture, you referred to the general situation and how October 7 may affect future memory and trauma. Now, you're absolutely right in pointing to the right-wing source of anti-Semitism. But if you look at the Gallup dates in the US and see that in the age group between 18 and 24, more than 60% of the people think that it was a genocide in the October 7th, but they also think it was justified. Then this is certainly not a work of right-wing demagogues, but of left-wing demagogues. And we have to face this extreme betrayal by the left, by certain parts of the globalized left, which for years now try to subvert the Holocaust and take it away from the Jewish people and see it as something totally generalized. And the Jews are not the ownership of the Holocaust. So this is something which belongs to all of the people, and the Jews shouldn't pretend that they are the sole victims. So what happened after October 7th fits into a long-term process that started at least in the 1980s or 90s. And this is driven by Islamist and left-wing demagogues, also by right-wing ones, but the betrayal, because I came I took part in many left-wing movements, and the betrayal, the feeling of betrayal is extreme in this respect, because I wouldn't have thought that this would happen, or in a way I did, but not to that extent.
First of all, thank you. I totally agree with you. The examples I gave were not the right wing. The guy who said to me he would leave the panel if I mentioned the word Holocaust in Israel, he is a righteous left winger. Absolutely. Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. And they're more dangerous. Because on top of, because they're more hurtful. You're right. It's not just abandonment, it's betrayal. And it's absolutely correct. I left several groups who said, of course, and by the way, you made a slip which is interesting. It's a correct slip. You said October 7 is a genocide. That is correct. October 7 is a genocide. But what people are saying today is what we did after October 7. What Israel did is a genocide, not what they forgot even. You know, it's sort of like October 7 is just a blip. And what matters is what Israel is doing to the poor Palestinians. Absolutely. But look, it was in 1967, the Hungarian-born Israeli satirist wrote a wonderful book you should read. It was right after the Six-Day War. He wrote a book called So Sorry We Won. You have to read it. I'm sure it's in English too. Simply because he put his finger exactly on the spot. Jews are not supposed to be winners. Jews are not supposed to be powerful. Jews are not supposed to have a state that is amazing in many ways, helps the world in so many ways. It's not supposed to be the Jewish thing. Jews are supposed to be. Oh, it reminds me of another book that you should look at, fairly new. Here, in 2021, this is before October 7, Dara Horn, D-A-R-A Horn, wrote a book, People Love Dead Jews, Reports from a Haunted Present. So it's not like we are realizing this for the first time. It's I used to say that Europe, out of feeling guilty, does a displacement or a projection and blames Israel. You know, it sort of eases the guilt to say it's not us. The Jews actually deserved it. Right? We did a favor for the world. We cleaned 6 million. But again, we are now thinking about in the perpetrator mind. It's so difficult, and I knew we will go there. And I want to say I'm not an expert on perpetrators, but I am in a sense. We are the victims. Yeah, I remember when Dara wrote the book, The People Love Dead Jews, Abe Foxman, who is a Holocaust survivor, he used to be the head of the ADL, commented, and he sort of, he criticized her for being cynical and for not acknowledging the progress of how the world has, how Jews are flourishing. And it's a,
Well, it's not a happy note to end this wonderful lecture, but I guess, Julia has a question.
Yeah, I'm afraid, but there still is Jewish humor. There still is Jewish love of life. And I'm not just saying it to make it easier. It's really true. I wonder what the silent ones are thinking or feeling. Angela, what are you feeling? Or
I'm feeling a lot. Well, I'm not a Jew, but I'm working a lot on all those problems and the silence also in the perpetrator families. But I have not a model to measure it. I looked on it from a psychoanalytic point of view, and what are the reasons, what are the mechanisms, and what is the transgenerational impact on the next generations. That were questions I did. I didn't answer when you asked who has students, because I'm out of university meanwhile. I don't have students anymore. But I'm doing lectures, and I'm in contact with this community here, and yes, it's what I'm feeling is that I'm well at the moment when you said this is true, and it is also a kind of humor. I remember the sentence of somebody who said the Germans will never forgive the Jews Auschwitz. You know that, I think. This is something of, well, and I'm always very worried about all the things, how they happen, and the craziness of anti-Semitism, not only now, but through all the history, is something that is so awful for me. And well, I'm working on that. Let me make a point, because I think Julia wanted to say anything before we stop. But thank you very, very much, Yael, for your wonderful lecture.
Thank you. I keep feeling that I may be disappointing you because I don't have much good news.
That's not your fault.
Yeah, Achim, what are you thinking of feeling? Sorry, but I really would like to know.
There was a sudden wave of anti-Semitism following the 7th of October. And I also think that it was orchestrated, it was prepared, it was part of psychological warfare. So it was, it reminds me of some basic laws of Mr. Goebbels, no? When you want to spread some new opinion, you have to make it easy, emotional, and repeat it time after time after time again, till the last person in the population knows it by heart. And this was free Palestine, from the river to the sea or whatsoever. It reminded me very much of this, of the tools the SA and the SS used to go into university to interrupt. Well, yeah, 2 days ago they interrupted a marathon in London, I think. You know,
Yes.
it's a toolbox of the SA, and there's one thing I think Elias Canetti wrote in his book Masses and Power, Masses y Poder. It is the inversion. First, you have a crime, you deny it. Okay, so I didn't kill my neighbor. Okay, so the next step is you relativize it. There are many persons who kill their neighbors. It's not only me. And then you invert it. I had to kill my neighbor because he was so evil. You cannot imagine. You know, this is the inversion. So this is the critical moment when the one group of person claims to be a victim, like the Palestinians. So what does it mean? So does this justify the massacre of 7th October in Kibbutz Be'eri and so on, so on? It seems that they succeeded somehow. Even in the German Deutsche Welle, in the German official well, radio station whatsoever, they said Israel declared the war to Hamas after the 7th October attack. Total nonsense. Yeah, it's the mixing of cause and effect. So this is a real danger, I think, you know, because when you start to mix cause and effect, you can do everything. the doors are open for whatsoever argumentation. But yeah, that's sorry
Yeah,
that I get so emotional. It's
for all
really
of us. I mean, I'm
yeah.
you have to be, if you're not emotional, this is where the numbing comes in. Joseph, if you're not emotional, you're numb, or you're just not around. Before Stefan, you look younger. Tell us what you think or feel.
Hello, yeah, thanks. First of all, thanks for sharing your thoughts and for the lecture, for the talk. It was very impressive. My thoughts about this. I'm not Jewish, and I'm interested in the critique of anti-Semitism and things like that. And I'm interested in supporting Jewish life in Germany, supporting Israel, of course. And we talked very, very, very big problems, very, very big issues today in the evening. So perhaps on the other side, it isn't only so. It isn't. It is, of course, it is a big problem, but perhaps it's also just one very small thought. The question about anti-Semitism is, I think, the most important question of the future of the whole society, of the society in the US, of society in Europe, and of course in Israel too. But in the last 2 months, I stayed in Chicago in the US, and it was at a university, and it was quite hard to see the widespreading of anti-Semitism in the academic in the US, and it's a left-wing anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And it's hard to see because people talk about freedom and talk about emancipation and things like that, and they often can't see the problem of anti-Semitism in the left-wing parts of the academic.
Yeah. Thank you for it. Both you and Joseph for bringing that up. It's but I have a favor to ask of all of you. If you, our center is the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma, and it applies to all people. And actually, one of the questions that is plaguing me is not just anti-Semitism, but it's the same question in the Yazidi people. They've been around for thousands of people, and they are always discriminated against, or killed, or raped, or whatever. It's like how do you call it? An ongoing process, and Angela and Joachim, everything you said led me to say, let's continue to talk. You'll help, because I'm wondering whether recently, indeed, whether the world needs, and I just attended last week a whole day meeting on the Dalit in people in India, right? It's a sect that is a caste, right? The untouchables. Oh, you read about them. It's so crazy. Humanity is full of these instances of multi-generational historical assigned groups to discriminate against. And so I began to ask myself, does humanity need this? Rather than say, oh, it's terrible, forget it, I'm actually saying, perhaps humanity needed Nazism. It needs to say, this is what Freud wrote, civilization and its discontent. Remember talking about psychoanalysis. Maybe he was right. You know, we have Eros and Thanatos, and it's forever a competition. And this is what human life is about. But my thinking goes very well, very much in this direction now. It's but the favor I was going to ask, we have a library, we have a digital library that aims indeed at covering all issues on all dimensions and all disciplines, covering issues related to multi-generational legacies of trauma. So please, if any of you referred to several writings, some of which I may not know or we may not have, I would really appreciate if you wrote to us. And your own publications as well, if they're connected to intergenerational transmission. That would be extremely helpful. And also, if you would want to attend our webinars, which we do very often, please, again, send me, either give Elizabeth the permission to send me your email addresses or send them directly to me. I would very much like to remain in touch with you. Julia, you didn't say anything. Come on.
I just recall in my memory that you told me once that you were born in the state which was named Palestine under British mandate. And I'm just wondering, what do you feel when you see today those slogans with Free Palestine, as a person who has been Palestine yourself as Jew once?
So thank you for asking that. I feel almost like crying, actually. I am older than Israel, which is a very funny thing to say. I'm older than my country. I was born under British mandate. In the worst traumas of my own childhood before the Holocaust news began to come were the British, right? They were terrible colonizers, as you know. And one of the things that troubles me, and they are really, what's the word? They love Islam, they love Muslim. Wait, you know the word. Not Muslim files, how do you call, you know what I mean? The British culture very much likes Islam and Muslim people and the relationship. But it's like, I'm blocking. But, you know.
You mean a kind of Islamophilia?
Yes, thank you. Islamophilia, thank you. But they, look at that. Okay. For example, there was a curfew when I was a little girl. From 6 in the evening till 6 in the morning. you had to stay indoors. Nothing could be outside. And you can imagine, those of you who know Israel, it's sort of crazy because it's 6 p.m. is the light is. I had a little dog. She was very cute, Lily. And at 6:10, she ran out. And they shot her in front of me. So for me, that's the British. It's one of the worst traumas ever. You can imagine that. But at any rate, they also, the moment Israel was announced by the UN, they just, like thieves, they just disappeared. But for me, in many ways, the British were very similar to the Nazis. The way they ruled, they colonized. Like Joachim said, you know, they all use the same mechanisms to rule, to frighten, to intimidate. Yeah, so I remember being woken up when Israel was born. They were singing in the streets, and I woke up and I said to my mother, "What's going on?" She said, "We have a country." So, and then immediately we had a war the next day. And I remember that too. That was very scary. But I don't ever remember hating Arabs. That was different. Even the war. Okay, so they wanted the land, we wanted the land. It wasn't hatred. It's simply, we didn't grow up with hatred. It was really different than now.
Thank you very much, Yael. I think it's a wonderful last word. It can become better. So I think after 2 hours and a little bit, we'll stop on this note. It's a wonderful point.
Thank you, darling.
Yeah.
Thank you
So much. Yes.
Thank you.